Before we start, make sure you subscribe and like this video. The people at my new job are strange. I've never had a proper job before. A few years ago, I started to deliver newspapers around the village on my push bike. Mother spoke to Alan, who owned the little paper shop on the corner of the square, and she told him that her quiet daughter was interested in making a little spare cash. I think Alan was surprised to know that Mother had a daughter, but he was enthusiastic nonetheless. Next thing I knew, I was awake before the sun, dropping papers on doorsteps and inside mailboxes, occasionally saying hello to old Mr. Rentwood down the road when I caught him walking his dog in the fresh dawn air. He never really spoke back or looked at me, but I loved to say hello. I learned so much about people cycling around like that. I saw flustered parents loading tearaway children onto bright yellow buses, older people tending their patchwork gardens, so barren in the winter and blooming into bright corners of paradise as spring turned. I heard snippets of everyday conversation, so mundane and yet so curious to me. I learned new words as I heard them spoken. One cool summer morning, I overheard Mrs. Hatherty describe the birdsong in the golden air as a cacophony, and I drove Mother crazy, finding any sound that I might be able to refer to as a cacophony. As I cycled around the village, I learned. My hungry eyes and ears latched on to anything that felt new, that I could store in my brain. I'd never been social. I spent all my time with Mother. So as the world whistled past me in its ever-busy state, I absorbed all I could. And when I got home, I'd lay out all my findings to Mother, and she'd help me understand. She taught me what cacophony meant. When Mr. Rentwood started walking alone, she explained that his dog had gotten old, and that sometimes sad things happen to older dogs. Then she explained to me what sadness was. She taught me the names of all the flowers I saw in all of the gardens, and I used my new knowledge to delight the avid gardeners I passed, who beamed brightly when I told them how much I loved their chrysanthemums. That was the only time anyone spoke to me, really. I was the quiet girl with the yellow bike who delivered the papers and never stopped for longer than a hello. Those little moments I created when I found something kind to say to someone, those were the only interactions I had. I savored them. I loved my paper round. It consumed me. It was all I ever remembered doing. But eventually, Mother said, I needed to go out into a bigger world so I could learn more. Paper rounds were for little girls. Mother had helped me to become a grown woman. It felt like no time at all before I struck lucky on my job search. And it was all thanks to my paper round. Alan, the man in the shop, had installed a community notice board just last year. It held a rotation of different notices, some posters in full color, some little scraps of hastily scribbled messages. On that day, when Mother stopped in to collect my wages, a gleaming white sheet of paper sat in the very center, 4 lines of text in clean black type. Wanted, office administrator, seeking a motivated individual looking for a full-time opportunity, experience not necessary, full training provided. The last line was a phone number and the address of a local dentist's office. I knew the place. I'd cycled past it more times than I knew how to count. Mother saved a picture of the notice, and she all but ran home to tell me the good news. And just like that, I had my first job. I think Mother reached out to them, and whatever she said, it worked. I met Dr. Anderson for the first time when I came in for orientation. She was a gentle older woman with kind eyes. She remarked on how funny it was that she'd never seen me. She looks after all the teeth in the village. She told me she'd need to see the damage in my mouth sometime soon, in a tone that I didn't understand. It seemed stern, but her face still seemed kind. I reviewed it with Mother later that day, and she explained to me that it was a joke. I decided I liked jokes, and then, just as suddenly as everything else, it was my first day. My duties were simple enough, and Mother had helped me to practice them. I had to sit behind the gleaming mahogany desk in the waiting room to greet patrons as they arrived, sign them into their appointments, and help them with their queries. I also had to answer the phone, and I practiced saying, "Dr. Anderson's office, how can I help?" until I felt I might repeat every minute of my existence. I also had to do plenty of paperwork and filing and note-taking, but Dr. Anderson told me not to worry about that just yet. Julia, the other office administrator, would show me the ropes, and in time I'd be able to do more. Once I learned how, I arrived at the office in plenty of time. As Mother said, that's what people do when they have jobs. They get there early. It seemed funny to me. My job description say 8 o'clock, but Mother said it's just the way people do things. Julia arrived just as I did. She was a plump lady with a shock of red hair, the brightest red I'd ever seen. She arrived as I was chaining my bike, greeting me with a hearty hello. I only saw her face for a second, distracted as she was, fumbling in her giant purse for a set of keys. She walked ahead of me, still talking jovially about the weather and the traffic, and how nice it was to finally have some help on the big mahogany desk as she led me into the building. But when she walked through the door, she stopped. She held it ajar, and when she turned to look at me fully for the first time, she did so with a face that sent a thrill of fear through my system. Her eyes were blank, devoid of any emotion, but her mouth was twisted into a grotesque approximation of a smile. Her teeth bared, lips stretched over them, a glisten of saliva on her exposed gums. She didn't move, simply stood and held the door open, fixing me with that twisted expression. I stood frozen, held by her gaze. After what felt like hours, her vile grin began to shift, and in a low, strange voice, she asked me if I was coming in. I didn't want to. I really didn't want to. But it was my first day, and if I didn't even make it through the threshold, Mother would be so mad. So I forced my stiff legs to carry me inside, past Julia, who snarled as I crossed by her hulking form, a horrid warm breath breezing over my neck. I hurried in, and like a blink, Julia's face shifted to a regular, gentle expression. She offered me a coffee, said she was making herself one if I'd like one too. I meekly declined and hurried away from her to stash my purse beneath the big mahogany desk. It was empty, as I had nothing to carry, but I'd learned from my paper round that people always carried a bag of some kind when they went to work, so I carried one too. I took some deep breaths as I bent down and shook my head a few times, trying to dispel the image of Julia's twisted face. Surely, I thought, I must be being silly. Julia is just a regular person. I took my place in the chair I'd been shown, behind the big mahogany desk. It was our job to open up the office, Julia said, but for today she'd do it herself if I could just watch and learn. That eased my nerves a little. I could learn. I knew how to learn. I watched Julia busy herself, bringing the room into humming life. I noted every detail. The way she held the computer switch for 2.5 seconds, the way the lights flickered 3 times, before they bathed the room in a fluorescent glow. I took a stream of mental pictures, learning. I was distracted from my task when Dr. Anderson walked in, and to my horror, her face was fixed in the same evil grin I'd seen on Julia earlier. I froze in my seat, but Julia didn't flinch. Instead, she bared her teeth right back. It was like watching one of those nature documentaries, the grimace of predatory animals, showing their fangs before they pounced. I braced myself, racking through my brain to see if I could make sense of this, if I could possibly predict what would happen to me in this room with these women fixed in grotesque masks. I wanted to scream, or run, or hide under the desk. But before I could do any of that, Dr. Anderson turned her grimace to me. I whimpered, recoiled in my seat, and like a spell was broken. Dr. Anderson's glare dropped, and a look I knew to be worry etched over her face. She wanted to know if I was okay, if I was feeling sick. She told me I had nothing to be nervous about, and that I'd be fine here. She told me that she knew it was my first day, but that I'd settle right in. You'll be one of us soon. That's what she said, and as she said it, her face morphed once again. I cowered in silent horror. I'd be one of them? I didn't want to know what they were, or what it meant to be one of them. I wanted to run all the way back to Mother, to wrap myself in the safety of the darkness at home. I wanted to be back on my paper round, where all the people I saw were at a distance and the words we exchanged were fleeting. I couldn't stay here. Not if these women, or whatever they were, because people didn't have faces like that, intended to make me one of them. Mother would be disappointed, but she'd understand. She'd have to understand. I'd show her those horrible faces, and she'd cradle me and tell me I was brave. She'd promise never to send me back to this place. Before the thought left my mind, I bolted. I sprinted for the door, past Julia and Dr. Anderson. They cried out, and I heard their jumbling footsteps as they began to pursue me. They called my name in haunting, guttural screams. I didn't stop to unchain my bike. That would take too long. And if they caught me, I couldn't bear to think it. My feet pounded the hard concrete. The morning air whipped heard before. They almost sounded like hooves, the deranged, clumping steps of an animal. I pressed harder and harder until their peculiar footfalls were quieter, and then eventually silent. I didn't slow, though. Any pause could give these creatures opportunity to pounce on me. I fled all the way to Mother's home and cascaded through the door. Mother's eyes snapped open from her place in the corner, and her piercing gaze fixed on me as I slammed and bolted the door, and then collapsed against it in a heaving pile. They were all wrong, I shrieked, answering her unspoken question. They had this horrible face, Mother. Dr. Anderson and Julia, they weren't people. They weren't like other people, Mother. Their faces. Mother's single raised hand stopped my outburst abruptly. She pointed to the docking station. Show me. Slowly, I unfolded myself and staggered into the seat. My hands trembled so badly that it took 2, 3, 4 attempts to slot the wire into the port on the back of my neck. The screen began to glow, and I cast the footage my eyes had recorded onto it for Mother to watch. I flinched as I saw those faces again, those grotesque, inhuman faces. See how their mouths twist. Their eyes are so flat, there's nothing to them except for those horrible, horrible smiles. Mother exhaled, deeper than I've ever heard her, and she began to explain. I learned something that day. I learned that sometimes when humans smile, It isn't because they're happy. It's because they're being polite, because the social rules that govern their society tell them that they have to smile. And because there's no feeling behind that smile, the only thing it twists is their mouth. It creates that flat, terrifying expression that I saw in those women. I learned that when humans walk through a door, they hold it for the next person. And then, when Julia stopped, she was holding it for me. The snarl she breathed down my neck was something called a sigh, and humans sometimes sigh when they're frustrated. I learned that sometimes female humans wear strange shoes that help them to appear taller. And those shoes make loud clomping sounds, especially when they run. Mother was so disappointed in me, and I understand it. I'd bolted on the first day. After all of her hard work, contorting my vessel to resemble the progress of human aging, so that I may shift from teen girl to young woman. She'd sent me out there to keep learning, to keep documenting the humans, so that my intelligence can continue to progress, so that in time I could get better jobs with better databases for Mother to access and better human information for her to collect. How would I ever reach those big, shiny offices if I couldn't last an hour in this tiny one? Mother needs me to make it in the human world so I can be her bridge, so I can plug her into the greatest technologies the humans can muster up, and she can make it better. The humans need Mother to take control. We're going to have to move, Mother says. Find a new village and a new little office so I can keep on learning new human jobs until she gets me, the one that'll let her become mother to you all. She forgives me because I gave her so much information on the paper round. All those phone numbers I took images of, the profiles of the humans I pass by daily, the casual normalities of a human society. She made good use of those, so she'll forgive me. But that dentist's office had so much valuable information to steal, and I ruined it. So she's going to power me down now until she thinks I'm ready for the next job. Please subscribe and like the video. Also comment your favorite horror movie so I can stay motivated to upload more videos like this.